Of quick questions. Just as a group, as I go through these, if you're answering yes, raise your hand high. If you're answering no, sit on your hands. Will you actively endorse the two winners of this primary if you don't happen to be one of them? Yeah. Is it your assessment that climate change is taking place? Is some of that change the result of human activities? Would you work to hold electric utilities to the current requirements of generating 15% of their power from renewable resources, such as solar and wind, by 2025? Too late.
We need to increase it.
Well, that sort of touches on this next one. Do you support the Clean Air for a Healthy Arizona initiative, which would require electric companies to generate half their power from renewable sources by 2030? And this one's not really a lightning round, but a short answer question that jumps off of that. In March, Governor Ducey signed a bill, HB 2005, that could essentially nullify that initiative if it were to pass by allowing utility companies to pay a fine of as little as $100 if they didn't meet those requirements. What can the ACC do about that, assuming that that initiative were to pass? And a real quick answer, Sandra.
Well, again, as Bill has stated, the commission is the fourth branch of government, and other branches cannot tell the commission what to do when it comes to setting policy. So if
You can finish your thought, sorry.
So if the commission is setting policy and the fines are $1,000, then that's the fine that should be set and not what bill passed the legislature and signed by the governor. It should be null and void and unconstitutional.
Kiana.
Yes, the Corporation Commission is the governing body that we should look to, and that is responsible. So we set the policy. Elect me, I'll be that policy maker, making sure that these type of energy bills are not, even if they're squashed, that we go for it as the commissioners, making sure that that we get clean energy.
Anything to add?
I think the legislation is unconstitutional. As Sandra noted, there's actually a specific provision in the state constitution that gives the commission the authority to impose fines much higher than that. If a lawsuit is filed, I would intervene in that lawsuit and protect the commission's authority.
Back to the lightning round. Is the current Arizona Corporation Commission corrupt?
Oh, God. Let's talk about that.
We'll get to that. We'll have a chance. Be able to force a regulated utility to open up its books. Are emails and text messages about commission business public records, even if they're sent from a private account or device? Not a whole lot of disagreement on any of these questions. Should commissioners also be employed by corporations and industries that are regulated by the ACC? No hands for that one? You guys don't want a little paycheck on the side?
I had to make sure I understood the question. I didn't want to, was that a yes or a no? I had to make sure I understood it before I raised my hand.
Should they be able to get those jobs?
No.
I'm just kidding. Should commissioners accept campaign contributions from regulated companies and their employees?
No.
Even if two of you win in the general election, the commission will still have a Republican majority. How can you work in a bipartisan manner to get things done? Bill Mundell, you have 1 minute.
Well, there's one commissioner, Bob Burns, a Republican, who has been fighting in court to get Pinnacle West and APS to have to disclose how much they actually spend in dark money against Sandra in 2014, and he's fighting tooth and nail to get that. And what I've said is the first thing that Sandra and I are going to do, after we're sworn in January, is sign a subpoena to get to the bottom of the dark money that has been spending in Arizona. Not only has it been spent in corporation commission races, it's been spent in the governor's race, Secretary of State, Attorney General. It has corrupted our democracy here in Arizona. And if you're not willing to take on APS and Pinnacle West and stand up to them and actually criticize them and say they've corrupted the commission, then you're either intimidated by them or you want their tacit support. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to work with Bob Burns to get to the bottom of the dark money spending in Arizona.
There are only 2 open seats.
Yes.
Right now, the body is held all by Republicans. There's no way to take a Democratic majority in this election cycle. So how will you work across the aisle to actually get things done?
The voice of one can make a difference. Bob Burns is currently fighting tooth and nail, but through my entire history in government, because I've been a government worker for almost 20 years, I tell you that I've had to work on both sides and convince people who started off not seeing what we have in common and what we should be doing for Arizona. That's how I was able to win a very tough school board race, becoming the first person of color, the first black woman in Mesa, Arizona, to win 53,750 votes. It's about going to the Tea Party president's house and telling her why she should vote for me, a Democrat who believes in public education and believes in fighting for us, the consumers. So it's about having the voice and knowing how to talk to others that have different opinions and always fighting for people. And I believe people see my heart and they see that I'm willing to go the distance.
Sandra Kennedy, same question.
Being at the legislature, I learned to work across the aisle, and I took that with me and my experience to the Corporation Commission. And Bill is absolutely right. We have decided that once we are elected, we are going to work with Bob Burns, and we're going to make some things happen, because it's going to take 3, and we've got to, that means that we would have the numbers to make those things happen.
Thank you. So you guys just each indicated that you think the current body is corrupt. What makes you think that specifically, Bill?
Well, we have direct evidence of it. When I ran 2 years ago, we talked about the corruption, and a lot of people thought we were exaggerating or being hyperbolic or, crying wolf. And then sure enough, last May, the former chairman of the commission, Bob Burns, was indicted for bribery. His bribery by the U.S. Attorney's Office, so it's the real deal. It's like Bob Mueller, it's the FBI and the U.S. Attorney. That trial is scheduled for the end of this month. And I was on Sunday Square Off right after Meet the Press and was asked about the indictments. And what I said was, I believe those indictments are the tip of the corruption iceberg at the commission. There is a culture of corruption where we talk about where the dark money is spent by Pinnacle West and APS to get commissioners elected, who then turn around and raise your rates and TEP's rates. And so that's why we say there's corruption. In fact, there's actually an FBI investigation going on right now, called Operation High Grid, like transmission grid. They give these names to these investigations, looking at the illegal spending, possible illegal spending by APS in the 2014 race. So again, I'm going to say it, if you're unwilling to criticize and actually say the name and say APS and Pinnacle West has corrupted the commission and our democracy in Arizona, then you either are intimidated by them or you want their support. So that's why I say there's corruption going on at the commission, because we've had direct indictment, and then we also have seen what's happened with the unjust rate increases that have occurred by these commissioners. Even though their staff said that rates should not be raised, they ignored the staff and went ahead and raised rates anyway.
Sandra, why do you think the ACC is corrupt now, and specifically?
Okay. I'll give 3 specific instances. In 2012, APS was at the table to get a rate increase. And I was very adamant that I didn't think they needed a rate increase because they were already making return on their dollars. So they didn't get a rate increase in 2012. When I left in 2013, 2 to 3 weeks after I left, that commissioner that has been indicted reopened that very case and gave APS their rate increase. Number two, Johnson's Utilities. It's a Class A water company. It's a big water company. And had come to the commission. And for the first 2 years of being on the commission, they wanted their taxes paid by the ratepayers. And we said no. And as soon as that same commissioner became chair, guess what happened? $18 million was passed on to the ratepayers of Johnson's Utilities. And yours truly voted no, because I didn't think that $18 million in personal taxes should be paid by the ratepayers. So there's plenty of corruption going on.
Corruption.
As a former staffer, that's why I'm here. I sat on the sideline doing my job, making recommendations that protect us, the ratepayers of Arizona, that recommended lower energy bills, that recommended the things that we're talking about with water conservation against companies that would come in and just siphon our water and not do what needs to be done to help us flourish here in Arizona. So again, when Gary Pierce rose to chairman, I was there, sitting as executive staffer. So it broke my heart to watch my administrative staff, who don't get paid a lot of money, because personally, I've never gotten paid over $50,000, but watching my admin staff type up a report to raise rates, despite the recommendation of all professionals like myself that says rates should not be increased, and watch her cry because she knew she wasn't going to be able to afford her bills. That's why I'm here. That's why I talk about the high rates in August and September, because I've seen over and over again, it's not just commissioners at there's staff people who work every day, who struggle to make their bills, and they have to sit on the sideline. That's why I became courageous enough to be the voice of all Arizonans, to work hard, make the sacrifice, giving up my job to be here to, one, change the Corporation Commission back to a place of integrity that serves us. So yes, there's corruption, and we can change it.
Now it's time for some quick, short answer questions, just about 30 seconds. So to run through some things really quickly. We're familiar from what you've said, especially here today, about how the ACC regulates the major utilities in the state, water, gas, electric companies. The ACC also deals with incorporating businesses and organizations. What could the commission do better in this area? Sandra, 30 seconds.
Well, I can tell you from experience, I found, about a month and a half ago, actually now 2 months ago, I think about it, went down to the Corporations Commission, to the Corporations Division, and wanted to file to open up a foundation. And I paid for expedited services. And by the end of April, I still had not had my foundation approved, and the process was way past the 7 to 15 days of expedition.
Well, as Sandra said, I mean, we definitely need to speed up the process when people file to incorporate or start an LLC. And one of the ways you can do that without increasing the staff is to bring staff over from the other entities, the other divisions. We talked about all the 15 functions that the commission does. You can bring over the other staff from those other divisions if there's a backlog to speed up the problem that Sandra just addressed with both incorporations and LLCs.
Same thing, Kiana.
I'm going to try to speak really fast. The Consumer Services Division has the opportunity to help us, the consumers. When you have struggling families, the Consumer Services Division could actually help promote and let struggling middle class to lower income families know about the opportunity to save money on their bills. And secondly, when you file your LLC there, if you're late on it, there's an annual report, and if you're late on it, money comes. Commissioners can decide where that money goes, and I want it to go into the arts for all our children here in Arizona.
The ACC also oversees securities regulation in the state, and how can the commission do that better? Bill?
Well, as I said, having served there 9.5 years and as chairman, I call it the mini SEC. When I refer to the Securities Division, we actually started, and most of the investigations start with the commission as civil matters, and then if the facts are discovered that there's a crime, it's transferred over to the Attorney General's for criminal prosecution. We actually did that in the Baptist Foundation. That was one of the biggest investigations in the state of Arizona, where it's called infinity fraud or religious fraud. So we can beef up that division with more investigators and attorneys in that regard.
I talk about protecting small business owners. It is so important that we have commissioners like myself that will serve with honesty, integrity, and that will not be bought or sold. And one of the things that we need, because that's so valuable, we need people who will serve you, the small business owners, us, the citizens, when it comes to security fraud, and that we could be assured that our interest is protected every time we have to go to the Corporation Commission for a case regarding our businesses and securities.
So on the way here, probably, like me, most of you had to drive across a railroad track to get here today. The Commission also regulates and ensures the safety of railroads and pipelines in Arizona. And what can the ACC do better in that regard, Kiana?
Railroads and pipelines and security. When you talk about pipeline, that's one of the things that I often talk about when we talk about water and infrastructure, right? We want to make sure, one of the things that happened at our legislator with Southwest Gas is actually hurting us right now because we're not getting tax money based on the size of pipe Southwest Gas is using, because there's a provision for them not to be taxed on that amount of money. And it's time that we look at every revenue source there is and protect us, the ratepayers.
Sandra?
When we're talking about railroads, we're really talking about safety of crossings. When we're talking about pipelines, we're talking about safety and making sure that the gas is traveling safely without explosion.
Bill?
Oh, I was looking at the clock, and well, I would say a couple of things. She always is. What I would say is do what we did when I was there and Sandra was there. We would hold public meetings in the communities that are impacted by our decisions. We did one, I remember we had one in Wilcox and other parts of the state and Flagstaff, and my goal and what I did when I was a commissioner, I said we need to get out of Phoenix and go to the communities that are impacted by our decisions and hold public hearings to listen to the people that live in those communities, to tell us and give us information on what kind of railroad crossings there should be. Should there be gates? Should there be just, nothing at all other than a sign? And that's what the commission does when it determines the safety of railroad crossings.
And let these guys really put their cards on the table and ask each other some questions for a moment. So, who has a question for Kiana? All right, go ahead.
Do you agree or disagree with the Code of Ethics that was recently passed by the Commission?
I disagree with the Code of Ethics. I believe there should be one. It should have higher standards, and those and in it actually enforceable things that hold the commissioners to a higher standard. So the Code of Ethics that was just passed is not strong enough and does not protect the interests of the ratepayers and the consumers.
Thank you. Bill, anything for Kiana?
Well, I don't want to.
You don't have to.
No,
here's your opportunity.
But I don't want to beat up on her either. I can ask
That's
her.
what you're here for, right?
Well, try to be a gentleman, but in any event, you've heard me mention a number of times that you will not criticize APS or Pinnacle West. Do you believe that APS and Pinnacle West has corrupted the commission?
Yes, sir. I totally believe and take a stance every time I get a chance to talk about APS. I don't talk a lot about what's happening in your race and what happened in the former races, because it's so important for me that the consumers realize that every utility that governs them, that the Corporation Commission has authority, it's also them. It's not just APS. It's not just Of course, not just, it's all utilities. It's standing up for all Arizonans. Yes, APS and all of the rate increases have been unjust. That's why I stand here. That's why I'm here. These are the things I saw that brought me to the table. So APS, I try to do an informed. Consumers ask me every single day, Kiana, we need education and what the commission does. You are in the minority knowing what the commission does. 85% of Arizonans do not know what the commission does. So I try to have, as much as possible, an education-based campaign that talks about the importance of the Corporation Commission, how it changes our lives, how it's hurting our lives, and how no matter where you live in Arizona, even if you don't have APS, you should be concerned. You should actually get with your friends and do everything you can to elect myself and someone who's going to stand up and be an advocate for you.
Thank you.
We're starting to get a little bit close to the time limit that we have here today, and we're going to give each of you the opportunity to give a brief closing statement. Each of you has some experience on the Corporation Commission. When you're wrapping up and making your pitch, please let us know something new you've learned during this campaign about what the Corporation Commission should be doing differently, and how do you see this race moving ahead? Bill Mundell, you have 2 minutes.
Well, that's a good question. You said to try to talk about how we see the race moving ahead. As we talked about during this forum, looking at the 15 functions that the commission has, and looking at the experience of both of all the candidates, we believe, Sandra and I believe, that we will be the strongest nominees in November to win the 2 seats for the Democratic Party, and also help turn Arizona blue in November. Kiana talked about running and winning at the Mesa School Board, and she should be commended for that. But I would say that, and I usually ask the question, who was the last Democrat to win a statewide race in Arizona? Most people say Jan Napolitano or Terry Goddard. It was actually Sandra Kennedy. She's the last Democrat in Arizona in 2008 to win a statewide office. There's 11 statewide offices, and she won it with over 1 million votes. And the reason I bring it up is because I've known Sandra for over 30 years. As I said, we served in the legislature. She's actually very modest about her accomplishments. And she was one of only 12 African-American statewide elected officials west of the Mississippi at that time in 2008 when she won. And so I see this race evolving. I see us wanting to have strong candidates going into the general election that can talk about all the functions that occur at the commission, and not just 1 or 2 of them, and how, and it's important, how the corruption, and maybe I'm beating a dead horse here, but how the corruption by Pinnacle West and APS has corrupted the commission, and yes, impacted all of you, the consumers. You talk about consumers, I can talk about consumers, and how that corruption has a direct impact on unjustified water bills, unjustified sewer bills, unjustified electric bills, unjustified natural gas bills, etc. That's why I bring it up. That's why we bring it up, because there is a direct correlation between the corruption that's occurred and unjustified rates. And Sandra talked about the $18 million in the Johnson Utility bribery case. That's what it's all about, that they voted to pass on the taxes, the personal taxes of Johnson to the consumers, to you, the consumer. That's why there is a nexus, a correlation between the corruption and unjustified rate increases. To be the Democratic nominees in November, and to have your support. Thank you for putting this forum on for us today.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate you being here. Same question. As you make your pitch here to these voters, and whoever else might be listening in a little bit later when we have this video posted, please let us know something new that you've learned during this campaign about what the ACC should be doing differently and how you see this race moving forward. And Bill went a little bit over time, so I'll give you a little bit of extra time too.
Sorry.
Thank you. We talked about new, we talked about direction. And I'd like to take the question just a little bit differently because I think the commission has its issues. As Bill has stated, the corruption is alive and well. And until Arizona voters step up to the plate and elect two individuals who can speak on behalf of the voters, who are not afraid to step up to the monopolies, we're going to have the same issues that we have today. Just corruption begots corruption. So I thank you today for the opportunity. I thank you, the moderator, for giving us the opportunity. I think the questions were great.
Well, thanks for coming in and letting us poke at you a little bit.
Well, I enjoyed the poke. And Bill and I we talk about the commission, but here's my ask of you. The commission is not at the top of the ballot. It's not in the middle of the ballot. It's on the bottom of the ballot. So I'm going to ask you to start at the bottom of the ballot and work your way to the top.
Kiana, again, what something new you've learned throughout the course of this campaign about how the ACC should be working a little bit differently, and how do you see things moving ahead towards the November election?
The newest element to this race that I've seen, because I've been very supportive and have worked on and helped my colleagues that have actually sitting up here when in past years when they were running. But the one thing that's the nuance that I bring to the table is a breath of fresh air. Looking at, we've been losing this race for the last couple of cycles, but working hard and making sure that we lock arms with all the progressive groups out in Arizona that's willing to do the hard work like A4A, because Alliance for Action, because it's important and that's how we get it done. We will win this race with people power. And yes, I do have the expertise. I actually do have a national presence. Yes, I'm a school board member, but I also just got back from Washington, D.C., advocating on behalf of No Place for Hate for our entire state when it comes to, in our schools, the Anti-Defamation League works very hard to make sure that all people are protected. So one thing that I do tell you, I've been around this entire state and I appreciate each and every person, and I've garnered a huge amount of support, so I was able to qualify for this race being a one-woman show. So when you hear rumors about APS and coziness and scared, I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not afraid of my opponents. I'm not afraid of anything. I've been in many places, 1 o'clock in the morning by myself, doing this work because it's so important that we do it. So I have the guts, I have the grit, and I have the fresh voice that you need. As we talk about the Democratic Party and needing young people to get involved, at 40-something years old, it's about experience. I'm here. I've done the work. So I hope I don't have to be 60 to be elected in this race. 60 is not old, but I hope that I can do it in my 40s and actually make this difference, because it is time that we go forward and progress here in Arizona. And that's what I bring. And with everything that's in me, I promise you, any lies, any rumors, anything you hear about me being an APS operative, it's not true. And the one thing will let you know that it's not true, look at Arizona list, look at Emily's list, and look at the National Organization of Women who've all endorsed me, and I bring them up because women check out every detail about you, and I pass the scrutiny. So I let you know that I'm working for you. So I ask you to put your confidence in me and help me get through the primary, and please cast your vote. I'm clean, and I'm a clean elections candidate, and I believe in clean policies. So I won't take jabs. I won't do any of these things no matter how much I'm poked in pride. I believe in going high every single time.
Thank you all so very much for being part of this forum. Thanks to the organizers, Alliance for Action, for Democratic Club of the Santa Rita Area and the Democratic Club of Quail Creek very much, and especially thanks to the great staff here at Quail Creek who always make these events so pleasant to pull off. They really pitch in quite a bit. And thanks to Dan Shearer of the Green Valley News for letting me sneak down into his area for an afternoon. Appreciate that. And of course, we very much owe these candidates thanks for coming and sharing your ideas.